Is my voice audible? Guys, anyone respond? Okay, good morning everyone. Is my voice audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is my screen visible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay, we'll just wait 1 minute, then we will start today's class. Okay. So, all right, let us start continuing our discussion. So, in the previous class, we discussed what is an operating system. We discussed briefly that what operating system do. We try to understand from a different perspective, like what is the user's perspective, how an operating system can be viewed from user, and how a system will look into an operating system like a resource allocator, like how it handles the processor, file storage space, input output devices, memory space. All these things we try to understand in the previous class. And then we try to define an operating system. We try to understand what is a bootstrap program. It will load initially uh, to load other kernel program. Kernel is a main part of an operating system that will work in order to function the operating system. Upon that, we have a system programs or user programs that will be loaded. We also try to understand what how the computer organization operations will look like, right? So we have interrupts, we have how the interrupt can be generated, hardware interrupt we try to understand, and also we try to understand the storage structure, like how storage can be varied with respect to uh, computer. We try to understand that there are different storages like registers, cache, main memory, hard disk, magnetic disk, optical disk, tapes, and so on and so forth. We try to understand also the access time is less for the registers and cache, memory, and subsequently, but it's also expensive. Registers are very expensive. Cache is very expensive next to registers, and main memory is next expensive to cache, and all these things we try to understand. We try to understand that main memory is a volatile. We main memory, cache memory, registers memory, and all are volatile. So we have to keep data permanent. For that, we need non-volatile hard disk. And also, we try to understand in hard disk there are two types: electrical storage and magnetic storage. Uh, Mechanical storage. We try to understand the mechanical storage is like HDD, and electrical storage to SSD. SSDs are very fast, but it's also expensive. We try to understand the input output structure, like how a modern computer system works with an input output instruction set, right? So we try to understand all these aspects. So let us now continue to discuss few more important aspects of operating systems that we need to aware. So before that, we try to understand what is a computer system architecture. In computer system architecture means we have uh, inside the processors and memory, how they are designed for us to I mean, what is the underlying hardware mechanism of computer architecture we'll try to understand. Based on that, how operating system will help us to carry out few things we'll try to understand. So ideally when a computer was designed, it was a single processor systems which contains a single processor containing one CPU with a single processing core. What is a CPU? We try to understand the first class, if you remember when I explained that what are the system unit, what is the storage unit, input unit, output unit. We try to understand what is a CPU. It contains arithmetic unit, logic unit, control unit, and so on and so forth, right? So it executes instructions basically, right? So a single processor system will contain a single processor with a one CPU as a single processing core. So the core is a component that executes the instructions and registers for storing the data locally. In one main CPU, with its core is capable of executing general purpose instruction set, including instructions from the processors. So, but nowadays what we are using is multi-process systems. In multi-process systems, we have two or more processors with each single core CPU. So the processors share a computer bus. Uh, you have two three processors. Their processors share a common bus for accessing the clock and memory and other peripheral input output devices. They share a common bus. So why we need going for multi-process system? Because it increases the speed of the performance, right? The if the faster the instructions are, the better the speed. So the primary advantage is to increase the throughput. You can run more number of tasks, more number of work you can carry out when you incorporate multiple processors. So by increasing the number of processors, we expect more work done in less time. So that is the main advantage that we are going for multi-process systems. So when we expect that if n processors are there, we expect that the speed will increase n number of times, but it will be not the case. It will be less than n. Okay, it will be always less than n. The reason being is when you are keeping two processors, each processor should communicate with the other processor for executing a task. So the communication of handling a task will incur some amount of overhead. Okay, keeping all the parts of work to make everything go smoothly or correctly, this some overhead will happen. This overhead and the shared resources, like you have two process but only one system bus or one input output devices, the shared resources, these parameters of overhead and shared resources will lower the expect gain from the additional process. So expect that the speed up ratio of n process will be n, but it is not n. It will be slightly less than n because of this overhead. So since the processes are separate, one may be sitting idle while the other is overloaded. You have two process, one is always executing, the other is sitting idle, resulting in inefficiencies, right? So how you handle the inefficiency? That's where we study the data structures. Certain data structures will help us to avoid these inefficiencies. So the data structures is very important. I'll give a brief overview. Maybe not in today's class. On Thursday's class, I will give what are the data structures that we need to aware, and we will try to study in depth how the data structures are designed, how data structures um, are helping us to understand various parameters, right? So the data structure is very important in order to avoid the inefficiencies. It will bring a load balancing system, right? You have two processes. One process is not overloaded. Other process, how they are equally shared. The data structures will help us to have a load balancer system. We'll try to study all these things, the various data structures in detail. Perhaps you might have started working in your assignments straight away, but nevertheless, we will discuss in the subsequent classes. So in the multi-process system, say for example, you have multi-processing architecture. This is symmetric multi-processing architecture. So you have a processor 0 and processor 1. Inside the processor 0, you have the CPU 0, where the central processing unit, which is has its own registers, and CPU 1 also, the processor 1 also has CPU 1, which has its own registers. So you see that the processor 0 and processor 1 is sharing a common main memory using a system bus, but you can see that there is a cache memory is coming in between the registers and main memory to bridge the gap, or to bridge the mismatch speed between the registers and the main memory. So the cache memory will help to mismatch the speed. Okay, so likewise each processor will have its own cache. Okay, that also you can see. So this is one processor, this is another processor. We call that as a multi-processing architecture. They are symmetric because in each processor you have the same number of details, right? You have registers cache, you have registers cache. They're symmetric, they are looking um, same. That's why we call that a symmetric multiprocessing architecture. But whereas we have a dual core design with two cores on the same chip. So this is one chip, one processor, but you have inside two cores. So you have CPU core 0, CPU core 1. CPU core each has its own registers and cache. CPU core 1 has its own registers and cache. But you can see that again they are sharing a main memory, but this uh, in this dual core architecture, we have two cache. We have L1 cache and L2 cache. L1 cache belongs to the core, each core of the CPU, and L2 cache belongs to the processor, each processor. So L1 cache is L2 cache are attached with this cache help will bridge a gap between the main memory to the each cores. So we call that as a dual core. Okay, in the same chip we have two processors. Okay, now can you tell me, like when we are using nowadays i5 i7, how many cores are there? How many cores we are executing in our processor nowadays? Do you have any idea? Anybody can tell?
Sir, 4.
Six. Six for i7.
Okay, so if you have a doubt, if you have that doubt, you can simply go to the task manager. You can go to the task manager, you can see the performance. So you can see that how many cores are there. You can see that there are four cores are there. This is i7 with the speed of 3.4 gigahertz. You can see the performance of processor. CPUs are running, that how it is utilized, and also memory, that 77% of my memory is utilized, and hard disk is less, but Ethernet is again is using 500 kilobytes per second. The throughput, you can see that I'm sending with the speed of 500 kilobytes per second and receiving with this speed. Okay, so the IP address, Ethernet connection, mainly the processor and memory. You can see that the memory I have only 4 GB. Out of this 4 GB, 3 GB is effectively being used now. Only 1 GB is left free. But you can see the processor with i7, the speed of the processor with executing 3.4 gigahertz per second. You can see that CPU is uh, working only 4 or 5%. So the speed of processor is very high, but RAM is less. So if I increase the RAM, then I can run even more complicated process. Then it will make the memory CPU more busy. With the application, just I'm running a browser and presentation, so that's why it's taking less CPU. But whereas we can, if we increase the process more than that, we'll be able to utilize the CPU even better. But you can see that there are four cores in i7. So I have in each processor we have four inside the cores are kept and manufactured the process that is being designed. So you can also explore like what are the various cores that are in i3, i5, and so on and so forth. Okay. So in multiprocessor systems, we can call that as a multi-core. Uh, when compared to these two types, this is multi-processing architecture because each processor is independent with respect to core, right? This in this case, the cores are in the same processor, so we call that as a on-chip communication. Like this is on the same chip. Okay, So multi-core will be designed on the same chip. So the communication happening between one CPU core to other CPU core in this will be very faster than um, between the processors. So the communication speed will be faster in on-chip communication than um, multi-processing systems. So multi-core will be more speed because the if it has to communicate with this process, it has to come to the main memory and process. But here it will not come to main memory, it will come to cache memory, which just works very faster than the multi-processing systems. So multi-core systems designed on a single chip. So multi-core systems can be efficient than multi-chips with single cores because on-chip communication is faster than between-chip communication. So in addition, one chip with multiple cores uses significantly less power than multiple single core chips, which is an important issue when it comes to power because mobile devices and laptops works on battery also. The power consumption is significant. So on one chip with multiple cores, which takes less power than multiple single core chips. So we will try to understand one more time what are the computer system components. A CPU is a hardware that executes instructions. A processor is a physical chip that contains the CPU. A core is a basic component of unit of the CPU. Multi-core means multiple computing cores on the same CPU. Multi-processor means including multiple processors. So although nowadays what we are using is a multi-core, we usually call that as a CPU only. Okay. Uh, ideally the definition is, I mean, the usage is wrong. When I say CPU, it is a hardware that executes instructions. What I should use is multi-core system. But nowadays virtually all the systems nowadays, all the systems that is been designed or manufactured are multi-core. Nobody is using single core because it will be very slow. So all these things will be helping our multi-core. We use generally CPU, referring to a single computational unit of a computer system, and core as well as multi-core. Okay, and specifically refer to one or more CPUs. This is the way we use the idea of CPU. Okay, but although ideally underlying when I say CPU, it will be referring to one or more cores. So we have another non-uniforming access multiprocessing architecture. We call that as NUMA multiprocessing architecture. So still we have in multi-core architecture, you have different CPUs, but excuse me, the RAM is same, right? The random access memory is same. So what happens is that when you want to communicate between one processor to another processor, one core to another core, still it will take time. So in non-uniform memory access, the memory is also assigned individually to each processor. So you can see that CPU 0 is having memory 0, CPU 1 is having memory 1, CPU 2 is having memory 2, CPU 3 is memory 3. This is NUMA multiprocessing architecture. It is very faster. The CPUs are interconnected with each other. So when CPU 0 wants to access memory, it will access from its own memory. It will be very faster, right? There is no common memory, then common bus. If it has to access a shared memory, then it will take time. But individual memory will be faster. The only disadvantage of this NUMA multiprocessing architecture is, for example, if this CPU 0 wants to access some data from this memory 3, then it will be even delayed compared to the shared memory because the memory is not shared here. So the instructions will come to CPU 3 and CPU 3 will fetch from here. It will go to CPU 2 and some part of may be stored in memory 0. So since the memory is not shared, each memory is having their own individual CPU. The access time from one processor to other memory will be more than the shared memory. Okay, the shared memory time will be less timing compared to accessing across the different memory. Does it make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is the advantage and disadvantages of non-uniform memory access multiprocessing architecture. We also have blade servers. Blade servers are multiprocessor boards input output boards, networking boards are placed in the same caches. So the difference is between blade servers and traditional multiprocess system is that the blade processor's board boots independently and runs its own operating system. So some blade servers are multiprocessor as well, which does the types of computers. But in essence, this service consists of multiple independent multiprocessor systems. So each multiprocessor is independent uh, system. You'll have such kind of multiple independent multiprocessor systems. Each has its own operating system. Each this blade processor will boot independently. So we call that as a blade servers. So this is one category that we need to understand when we are discussing of multi-process systems. So you need to be very clear what is multi-process system, multi-core system, what is a blade server. Okay. So how an operating system operations are carried out, typically that we discussed in the previous class, that a bootstrap program will load, what happens when you power on. We'll try to discuss step by step. So when a computer started running,
Sir,
when a
sir, sorry
yeah,
to interrupt, but sir, please explain blade server once again, sir.
see, the blade servers you will have, it consists of multiple independent multiprocess systems. See, usually when a multiprocess systems, what happens is you'll have a shared memory. Okay, you'll have a shared memory. Your cores might be different that we discussed here now. So this is multi-processing architecture. Each processor is independent. You have a shared memory. When you keep two cores in the same process, we call as a dual core, right? So in NUMA architecture, what happens in NUMA architecture, each processor will have each memory, and the blade servers is more or less looks like this. But one of the best example of blade server is it works on the basis of NUMA architecture. See, each process has its own memory and own storage. They work independently. This work independently, this work independently, this work independently, this work independently, but although they are interconnected with each other. So one of the best example is blade servers is NUMA. So they work independently. Multiple independent process works independently multiple. So each processor boots independently and has its own operating system. Still, they'll be able to communicate with each other. So blade servers are systems with multiple processor boards, multiple IO boards, multiple network boards, which are placed in the same caches, means in the same system. We are placing multiple processor boards, multiple input boards, multiple network boards. So, but they work independently with its own operating system, or they can work together also. Does this make sense?
सर मल्टीपल इनपुट आउटपुट सिस्टम का मतलब दो तीन मॉनिटर रहेंगे उसमें ऐसे या फिर दो तीन कीबोर्ड से इनपुट करेंगे कुछ
Yes,
कुछ ऐसा.
yes, you can have that. Because it's run its own operating system, you can have multiple input output boards also.
Okay, sir. Fine, sir.
Okay, right. So now let us understand how the operating system operations works. So when a computer need to start running, for instance, it's a powered when you power the button in your laptop or in your desktop, or when you reboot, it needs to have an initial program to run, right? What is that initial program that we discussed in the previous class?
Bootstrap.
Right. So it's a bootstrap program. We noted that earlier. The initial program is there, bootstrap program, which is very simple. Typically, it is stored in a computer hardware, in a firmware. Okay. It is stored within the computer hardware. So it initializes the bootstrap program initializes all aspects of the system, CPU registers to device controllers to memory contents. The bootstrap program must know how to load the operating system and how to start executing that system. So the bootstrap program is responsible for loading the operating system and how the system will start executing. So excuse me. So to accomplish this goal, the bootstrap program must locate the operating system kernel, load it into the memory. Okay, the kernel program is the first main program that is loaded into the memory. So once the kernel is loaded and executing, it will provide the services to the system and its users. So some services are provided outside of the kernel system programs that are loaded into memory at the boot time. We call that as a system daemons, which run the entire time the kernel is running, right? So in Linux, the first system program is systemd, and it starts other system daemons. System daemons are also known as other system programs. Okay, so once this phase is complete, the system is fully booted. The system waits for some event to occur. So once your laptop or your desktop says that login, um, username, enter username, password, till that, on the background all these things happens is bootstrap program will identify where the operating system is. It will load the operating system. It will start executing that operating system and the functions. And once the kernel is started loading, um, then it will provide the additional programs that are loaded in the memory. We call that as system daemons. And uh, and it will be running all the time when the kernel is running, right? So once this all things happens, the system will be ready for some events to happen. When a user clicks something on an icon, when user is trying to launch a system program, it will load. If there are no process to execute, the no input output device to service, or no user whom to respond, the operating system will sit quietly waiting for something to happen. That's what happens, right? When you turn on an operating system, you don't load any program. The kernel only will be there in the main memory, and it will wait for some event to happen, some interrupt, like some interrupt from keyboard or some interrupt from mouse. It will wait something to happen to launch, and appropriately when the interrupts happens, the appropriate application programs are loaded into the memory to the processor. So typically this is how the operating system is executed, that we discussed already in the previous class, and I'm discussing here. So events are mostly happens by an occurrence of an interrupt that I discussed, like in a keyboard interrupt. When I'm trying to read a letter from the keyboard, we try to understand that how, in the previous example, how the device controller will come into the picture to load the keyboard between an input output device. So there are two types of interrupts that we need to understand. That is one from hardware interrupt, like that we studied in the previous class, like a mouse or a keyboard. When I tries to do something, when I'm trying to move this laser point from one place to other place, I'm interrupting the monitor, like I'm doing some interruption using hardware, right? But whereas operating system is capable of handling the interrupts in a software also. Another form of interrupt is also called as a trap or an exception, which is a software generated interrupt. We call that as a system call. Okay, so this interrupt can be caused either by error, for example, division by zero or invalid memory access, or by a specific request from a user program that an operating system service to be performed by executing a special operation. We call that as a system call. So system call is very important of interrupt. We will study this extensively in the subsequent classes. So wherever I highlight with the blue color font, those are the things that we are going to study in the upcoming classes, which are very important. Okay, the system call is very important. Whenever somebody says that I studied a subject called operating system, an immediate question one may ask is, do you know what is system call? So system call, in a simple words, I would say system call is a software generated interrupt caused either by error or by a specific request from a user program that an operating system service need to be performed by executing a special operation. This is a simple definition of a system call. We will try to study that what are the various system calls are executed, what are the various system calls are there, and how they are how they are working with each other. We'll study in subsequent classes. Okay, so one need to understand is an interrupt can be happening in two ways. One is hardware interrupt or a software interrupt. So we will study extensively about system call in the subsequent classes. So this multi-processor or blade servers, multi-core systems will help us to go for multi-programming and multitasking. Okay, so initially, if you see a memory RAM memory layout, you will always have some memory occupied by operating system, where the kernel is loading. Uh, Upon that, you will have n number of processes will be loaded because of multi-processing systems. Like you can execute multiple processes at a time, right? So operating system is capable of running multiple programs to keep in the processor or input output device, making the CPU busy all the time. Okay, so operating system is capable of doing that. So multi-programming increases the CPU utilization as well as keeping users satisfied. When we keep organizing the programs, the CPU always has no one to execute, right? As has always at least one program to execute. So what is a process? A process is a program in execution. Okay, an instance of a program in execution is called as a process. So when a process is executing, when a program is executing, we call that as a process. So we have process one, process two, process three, and so on and so forth. Depends on your availability of the space. We can run n number of processes. So when operating system is running, process one, suppose it's executing, and it will leave in between, say to uh, to meet input output operation. So meanwhile, input output operation is happening, the processor will sit idle. So we will not make the processor sit idle. We will utilize the increasing of CPU utilization. What we would do is, meanwhile, when process one is went for input output operation, we'll execute process two. Okay, and if process two is also went into waiting mode, we'll execute process three, and so on and so forth. Okay, but once this, while process 3 is executing, now process 1 is coming back, it finishes its input output operation, it's coming back, then process 3 will go into waiting mode, process 1 will finish its execution. So once the process finishes execution, it will be taken out from the memory. The memory will be vacant to address some other process file. Okay, so the process will not sit idle, it will execute multiple processes at a time, and there are various parameters in this case, right? So each when multiple processes are executing by the processor, how the CPU is scheduled, how different processes are synchronized, how one process will communicate with the other process, that my waiting period is finished, so that the next process will go into execution, how operating system will decide that after process 1, process 2 will execute, or process 3 will execute, how operating system will decide which process needs to be executed, how the process management will happen, how the memory management will happen. All these things will be, we need to look into it, right? That we are going to study in the upcoming slides. So the operating system keeps several processes in memory simultaneously. Operating system picks and begins execution of one of the process. Suppose if a process has to wait for some task, such as an IO operation to complete, in a non-multi-programmed system, CPU will be sitting idle because it's a non-multi-program. We have only one program, one process. But in a multi-program system, operating system switches to other process and executes other process. When that process needs to wait, CPU switches to another process and so on. Eventually, the first process finishes waiting and gets the CPU back. As long as at least one process needs to execute, the CPU is never idle. So that is the idea of multi-programming. And multitasking is a logical extension of multi-programming. In multitasking systems, CPU executes multiple processes by switching among them, but the switches occur frequently, providing the user with a fast response time. For example, I'm moving this mouse, at the same time the slide is being projected. They both are different tasks. Okay, see, when I move my keyboard up arrow and down arrow, this, I'm doing two operations. I'm moving my mouse also, and I'm moving my keyboard also. Um, so the response time is, uh, I'm doing two tasks, but for a processor, it works very fast because the speed of the processor compared to the human speed is very fast, right? The processor is always fast compared to the human speed. So consider when a process execute, it typically execute only for a short time before either it finishes or needs an input output operation. Suppose an input output operation may be interactive, which means that output goes to display for the user when input comes from a user keyboard or a mouse or a touch screen, right? So some interactive input output operations runs at people speed, so it may take long time to complete. For example, um, input may be bounded by user typing speed, 7 characters per second. When a person is able to type 7 characters per second, which is the fastest typing speed for the people, but for the computer it is ultra slow, it is superb slow. So what happens, rather than the CPU is waiting ideally at this speed of people, it it switches to other process, executes other process, because 3.4 gigahertz means it executes uh, 3 into to the power of 30 million instructions per second, right? To the power of 30 instructions per second, which is more than millions of instructions per second it will execute. The speed of processor is so fast, so it will not sit ideally waiting for the uh, people to give input, but rather the operating system will rapidly switch the CPU to another process. So when handling several processes in memory at the same time requires memory management, right? So you have multiple processes, and we need to pay attention at the same time will require memory management. So if several processes are ready to run at the same time, the system must choose which process will execute. So this making this decision is a CPU scheduling. So running multiple processes concurrently at the same time requires their ability to affect one process may affect the other process. So how we are going to handle the system without affecting the other, including process scheduling, disk storage, and memory management, is all these things will come when we come to multi-programming and multitasking. So all these things we will study in the subsequent classes, how the memory management will happen, how the CPU will schedule the different process which will execute next, how the process are scheduled, how the disk storage will happen, so that when you are accessing a file from a disk, the minimum access time in order to save the minimum response time or minimum waiting time, when the CPU is scheduling, it will the process when it is executing, the waiting time should be minimum. All these things we will discuss in the subsequent classes. I asked you in the one question in the previous class, when you have a file larger than your memory, uh, will be able to execute or not. Some of you said that it's not possible, but some of you said it's possible because of virtual memory. So even though in multitasking system, operating system will be able to ensure the reasonable amount of response time. The common method to ensure the reasonable response time is virtual memory, which will allow the execution of a process that is not completely in memory. So you have 4 GB file, you'll be able to load 1 GB file into your process. Still, your virtual memory will be able to capable of handling, even though that complete process is not loaded, it will execute the 1 GB of that file. Then it will swap the next 2 GB, third GB, 4 GB. The virtual memory management will come into the picture. The main advantage of this virtual memory is it enables the users to run programs that are larger than the actual physical memory. Okay, so the virtual memory will enable the user run to program which is actually larger than the physical memory. So this is a beautiful concept, right? So this, once the user wants to run a file which is even the larger size of the memory, the virtual memory will help, which will make the program free from the concern if a file is contains the memory storage limitations, right? So further, the virtual memory, it's an abstract main memory into a large, it's an abstraction. Abstractions which will hide the details how a memory will look uh, like when a main memory will look like a uniform array of a storage, which will the virtual memory will separate the logical memory, which we will be viewed as a physical memory. The physical memory in the RAM, how it look like an arrangements of uh, bytes, right? It will look like a bytes. Each byte is has own storage address, uh, but the logical memory view will help us to handle all this uh, view from the physical memory, where virtual memory will come into the picture. So virtual memory will abstract the main memory into a large uniform array of storage, separating logical memory as viewed as a user from the physical memory. We will study this virtual memory in detail in the subsequent classes, how the memory management will happen. This virtual memory management is also one of the chapter that we will discuss. Okay. So in a multi-programming and multitasking system, other thing we need, yes, somebody is asking question. Okay. So in multi-programming and multitasking systems, we also need to provide file system, because when you are installing a software, it will create folders, files, subfolders in your C drive. Operating system does that automatically. Okay. And when you're storing some file in your hard disk, when you're trying to access that, we need to have some way of, although you are storing in C drive, D drive, physically when you are storing some file at a particular place, how we are making sure that access time is very less, and so on and so forth. So the file system on the secondary storage management is also one important concept. We need to look at it. We need to look into it when we talk about multi-programming. So to ensure orderly execution, the system also must provide mechanism for process synchronization and process communication. How one process will communicate to other process, how the when you are executing two processes concurrently, they will synchronize with each other. These all things we will study. Okay. So to ensure process do not get stuck in a deadlock forever waiting for another, is also we need to address. For example, assume that you have two process, two input output device. One process is using one input output device, second process is using second input output device. So to complete the first process, it needs the second input device, which will be already occupied by second process. Second process, in order to finish, assume that it needs the input device 1 to finish it, but it is already occupied by process 1. So they both will keep on waiting for each other to release the other process to complete. But both process will not complete without releasing one another. So both process will enter into a deadlock situation, forever waiting for the other process to release. So who will release, how to release, how we will avoid the deadlock, or once the deadlock is happened, how will you prevent it? All these things also we will try to study in the few things. But these are the concerns that we need to take care when we talk about multi-programming and multitasking, right? Although multi-programming, multitasking provides a better futures, better throughput, better speed, more work in less time. However, the underlying problems also we need to take care, right? So these are the resource management. We call that as an operating system is a resource manager. When I say resources, we have a system CPU, memory space, file storage space, input output devices are the resources that are the operating system must manage, and how the process management will take place, how the operating system will handle the process management, how the what are the things that memory management operating system need to look into it, how the file system management, mass storage management, cache management, input system management, what are the things that we need to look at it. Each management is a each chapter. Okay. Each chapter we are going to look at it. Process management is one chapter, memory management is one chapter, file management, mass storage management is one chapter, input output, all these systems are one chapter, but I will just take you through briefly what they are actually are. So when I say process management, we try to understand that a process is an instance of a program in execution. We also study, for example, a program, a set of instructions, like it could be a compiler is a process, a word processing program run by an individual user on a PC is a process. So these are all process which represents a program in execution. Okay, a process is a program in execution. So when I say process management, the operating system is responsible how you are creating and deleting a user and system process. Excuse me. How you are scheduling processes and threads on the CPU, how the process being suspended or resuming, going into a waiting state or coming back, resuming to execute, how the providing mechanism for process synchronization, providing mechanism for process communication. All these aspects comes as a part of process management, which will be handled by operating system. Likewise, when you talk about memory management, like main memory is a large array of bytes ranging from size from hundreds to thousands of billions. Each byte has its own address. So to improve the utilization of CPU, the speed of the computer response time its users should be kept minimum. I mean, the response to its users should be very fast. So what happens, like the general purpose computer must keep several programs in memory, right? To create for the need for the memory management. The memory management is responsible for keeping track which parts of the memory are being currently used and which process is using them. Also allocating and deallocating the memory space where is needed, deciding which process excuse me, the parts of the process or data to move into or out of the memory. So these three important aspects are handled by memory management. Likewise, in file management, if you see a computer system convenient for users, operating system must provide a give me 1 minute, okay? This file management system, operating system must provide a logical and uniform view of information storage. The file management system is responsible for how you are creating and deleting files, how the directories to organize such files have been created and deleted, how you are supporting the primitives for manipulating the files and directories, mapping files into mass storage, backing up files on a stable non-volatile storage media. The file management system is responsible for all these activities. Likewise, in the mass storage management system, computer system must provide the secondary storage to back up the main memory, right? Main memory is volatile, secondary memory is non-volatile. So how we are mounting and unmounting, how we are making free space management, how we are doing the storage allocation, disk scheduling, partitioning, protection, all these things will come as a part of mass storage management. In cache management, uh, there are various types of storages that we already studied. So we see here, you see registers, cache, main memory, solid state disk, magnetic disk. You see the typical size. The size of registers will be less than 1 KB. Typical size, okay? It's not a thumb rule, it's a typical size. So cache memory will be less than 16 MB. Main memory is less than, more or less equal to 64 GB, and hard disk will be more or less equal to 1 TB, right? And magnetic disk less than 10 dB. So the implementation technology they use for registers custom memory with multiple port CMOS, cache on chip or off chip CMOS SRAM, main memory CMOS SRAM, flash memory for hard disk, magnetic disk for magnetic disk. The access time you can see in nanoseconds. Registers can be accessed by the processor within 0.25 to zero point nanoseconds, which is very fast because registers are the memories closely associated with processors, right? And you can see the access time for the cache 0.5 to 25 nanoseconds. The main memory 80 to 250 nanoseconds, and the hard disk 25,000 to 50,000 nanoseconds. Then the magnetic disk, the access time is very large, 5 million nanoseconds, which is very huge, right? So also you can see the bandwidth, the bits per second, megabytes per second. The registers can be able to, the speed is very high, 20,000 to 1 lakh, 1 lakh megabytes per second. It can, the bandwidth is very high here. It will be decreasing as the memory goes down. So usually the registers are managed by the compiler. Cache will be hardware, main memory by operating system, hard disk by operating system, and magnetic disk also by operating system. So the registers are backed by cache. Cache is backed by main memory is backed by disk. Disk is backed by disk only, and magnetic disk is also by disk or tape. So these are having these different types of memories. how the cache management will happen between the registers and cache. Excuse me. Registers and cache and main memories are the important things that we need to understand. Okay, so ideally a file, when I say integer a, when you are executing from hard disk, when executing from hard disk, you will typically load from hard disk to main memory to cache, and cache to register. This is how the migration of an integer a will take place from disk to register. Okay, this we discussed this already in the previous class. Disk to main memory, main to memory to cache, and cache to register. So IO system management is another important several concept. It's an important concept. So IO subsystem consists of several components, like how a memory management component that includes buffering, caching, pooling, all these things will happen. How a general device driver interface, how the drivers for specific hardware devices, all these things will be handled by input-output system management. Excuse me. What is buffering? What is caching? What is pooling? I'll discuss when we discuss this input system or input-output system management. All these things I'll discuss in detail. Okay. Excuse me, I'm having a lot of issues when I'm speaking. A lot of cough is coming up. I will stop here. We will finish today's class. If you have any doubts to this slide, you please ask. Anyway, the time is up. We have only 5 minutes left. If you have any doubts in today's class, you can ask. Otherwise, we'll stop here. The slides I already uploaded in your team. You can see that lecture 3, Introduction to Operating Systems Part 2 is already uploaded. You can see that whether you'll be able to access the file or not. If you have any doubts in today's class, you can please ask me. Otherwise, go through the slides. You can ask me in the next class also.
Okay, sir.
All right. If there are no doubts, we will stop here. We'll continue next Thursday.